Hello everyone, I'm Vivi and welcome back. The Sly series has so much potential in terms of storytelling, whether it's delving into backstories or solving certain mysteries, you name it, out of everything. There is one heartbreaking scenario we perhaps have thought about at least once, or imagined in the back of our minds, and that's the idea of Sly somehow visiting his parents. Now that sounds pretty vague without context. What we take into account here is time travel. Sly's still in Egypt. Whether or not he gets out of there is a mystery, but we have to realize that in order for Sly to get back home, he needs to travel forward in time, assuming of course Sly wound up in ancient Egypt. Sly Thieves in Time did have Cut Egypt DLC with his Egyptian ancestors like in common, so let's use that as our basis. Sly's stuck in the past and moves forward in time. Now, we can't help but wonder how Sly would even accomplish that, time traveling to the present. Now, it could happen in various ways. It could be Sly writing a code in the earliest version of the Thievius Raccoonus, Slyton Common's Papyrus Scroll in this case. He did create the Thievius Raccoonus after all. Sly's code, unbeknown to all his ancestors, would only be familiar to Bentley in the present. Another scenario, carve a message or a code on a treasure piece. That treasure could be hiding in the Cooper Vault in the present. Unusual phenomenon could happen in the vault, and Bentley would get curious. Assuming he has remote access to the vault via cameras or sensors, let's imagine. It could be any method in this case. It's all a matter of connecting the dots afterwards and finding the right artifact to use for Bentley's time machine. Before we dive into Sly visiting his parents' timeline, let's first add a bit more context. Let's think back to Le Paradox's Blimp. Sly ending up in Egypt could have been due to preset coordinates on the Blimp. Le Paradox most likely had plans to visit ancient Egypt. He never got the chance to do so because we managed to stop him just in time. Another preset coordinate could be Sly's parents' timeline. Think about it. If Le Paradox went through all that, have the canes stolen? What would stop him from wanting the same to happen to Sly's father's cane? Sly's dad did steal that diamond instead of Le Paradox's father stealing his spotlight. That situation alone would have enticed him enough to steal that cane as well. Okay, why not steal Sly's cane instead, you might ask? Isn't that inherited from Sly's dad? Well, yes, but it's likely Paradox thought it'd be easier or better for his ego to steal that cane from Sly's dad instead. But the question still remains, how would Sly, or why would Sly visit his parents? I'd imagine this being a complete unintentional situation. Think about it. Would Sly intentionally ask Bentley to travel to his parents' timeline using the time machine? You'd ask yourself, what would cause or encourage Sly to make such a decision, right? Instead, we apply the theory we just discussed. The Blimp potentially having preset coordinates. The Blimp crashed in ancient Egypt, sure, but a vital piece could have survived the crash. That vital piece could be what contains the system's memory, coordinates to Sly's parents' timeline in this case. Either Sly tinkers with it, accidentally causing him to get yanked into that timeline, or the gang for some reason used that piece to try and get back home from Egypt, assuming they find Sly. Then, once they move forward in time, they end up in that timeline due to that piece they discovered from the Blimp. The van might break down. Again, it could require a boost of some kind. They might have no choice but to stick around in that timeline until they figure it out. The longer they stay in that timeline, however, the more those inner deep thoughts of Sly's might start rushing in. He realizes his parents are still alive in this timeline. He could really start facing a deep emotional challenge. He could start feeling anxiety, start ruminating, panic even. We could see a heartbreaking side of him we've never seen before. That little voice inside his head telling him he can undo his parents' tragic fate. All of that control in the palm of his hands. Would he take the risk altering the timeline? Would he try to save his parents, knowing very well it could undo the bond, friendship he's built with Murray and Bentley? The Sly timeline, we believe, follows the grandfather paradox. Altering the past alters the future. One singular timeline. Saving his parents could cause Sly to never meet his friends in the first place, and never growing up at the orphanage. Another heart-wrenching feeling Sly might experience is the nature of his father alone. We never quite knew or understood why Sly's dad was never such a good friend to Dr. M. This is something Sly might discover, something he never would have fathomed about his father, something despicable even. Seeing as how Sly actually met his other ancestors, it's likely he could come across his father, albeit not the paradox way, canes getting stolen and them being trapped behind bars and all. If you didn't know, Sanzaru back in 2013 actually said something regarding the whole idea of Sly visiting his dad. Lead designer Matt Kramer was featured in episode 508 of the Gamerland podcast. This is a series of podcasts with co-hosts Kevin Miller, yes, the voice of Sly, and Justin Warsham. During that episode, Kramer mentioned how the team discussed Bentley's wheelchair, whether or not to keep it or give Bentley mechanical legs. They kept the wheelchair because that was now part of Bentley's character. As for Sly, a topic which was brought up frequently was Sly meeting his dad. Whether he'd do it or not, the team thought whatever those characters went through in the past, it's what made them who they are, and they didn't want to change that. Kramer then went on to compare Sly to Batman. Here's what he said during the podcast.
And I always bring up Batman because Sly Cooper to me is a lot like Batman.
Sure, yeah. Sure.
If Batman went back in time and he stopped the things that happened with the Joker, Batman wouldn't be Batman.
Right. He'd be George Clooney.
Yeah, we didn't want to ruin that. We didn't want to cross that and ruin the character. I mean, he wouldn't be who he was.
Now, I do get what he means, but it ultimately comes down to how they handle the story. Obviously, if Sly were to rescue his parents, he would undo his present. The thing which makes this all more interesting, what is it Sly would do exactly if he ever wound up in his parents' timeline? Another thing we have to consider, just how far in the timeline are we talking about? Is this during Sly's childhood? During the time the team laid low, according to McSweeney in Comic Issue 2? What do you think about all this? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. As always, a massive thank you to my patrons. I appreciate the support for the channel, and thank you all of you for tuning in. I've been VV, and until next time.